Right.
All right, we're live, man. So, everyone watching this, hello, Dave Mate. Most of you guys know who I am already, and we have Stephen Bentley, who's coming on today, talking about Brazilian yerba mate. I'm not the best at pronouncing this, but Chimarrão. And we're gonna. This is something that a lot of people have been asking me over the years that I've been involved with mate. Always asking me about that super green mate, especially if you follow me on Instagram, Circle of Drink on Instagram. You see a lot of pictures. I have a lot of friends and associates from Brazil who like for me to post their pictures all the time, so I do it, and it's that green, super green, powdery mate. It's not a mate that I drink every day, only because I was living in Argentina and I got accustomed to Argentine mates. But it's something that I've been wanting to get into a lot, and it's great that Stephen reached out to me a couple days ago and said that he knew a lot about this. He was living out in Brazil, so I said, all right, let's do an interview. Let me ask you some questions, and you could just educate Circle of Drink and everybody in the world who's watching this about Brazilian yerba mate. So I'll hand it over to Stephen right now.
Awesome. Yeah. So my first kind of experience with mate was actually here in the United States in the Atlanta area. I was having dinner with an Argentine family. And, since they were Argentine, they were like, hey, have you guys ever tried mate? A bunch of Americans. And we were like, oh, no. So they go and, they grab their Ziploc and they come out with the gourd. And I start feeling kind of weird, like, uh-oh, are we gonna do drugs here? And they're like, no, it's a tea. It's all right. It's cool. And so, they prepare a gourd and they hand it to me and they're all smiling and I drink it. And the only thing I could think of was, man, this is hot. It was, I really think that the water was probably boiling, which is a bad thing. But people will do it the way they do it, and I drank probably 2 gourdfuls before my mouth just said no more, too hot. So I thanked them, and it pretty much stayed there for a while. And then I went to Brazil. It's really, really hot in Brazil for most of the year, so a lot of people drink tereré, which is the iced mate. So I got pretty involved in that pretty quickly. A lot of people drink it and they offer it to you, and I'm like, yeah, this is cool. This is cold, so it's a lot easier to drink. It's more palatable on a hot day. But then pretty soon I got into kind of a circle, got pretty close with some gauchos, which is the people from southern Brazil, the gauchos in Spanish, and they drink the hot mate and
just to clarify, can you name the states, the 3 states in southern Brazil that where mate predominantly is consumed? That's what Catarina.
Yeah, Santa Catarina, Paraná. Well, starting from the north going south, the most northern state where they drink a lot of hot mate is Paraná, and then Santa Catarina, and then the big state, kind of the motherland of hot mate in Brazil, is Rio Grande do Sul, where most of the kind of tradition comes from that most southern state. And I had a lot of friends from that state of Rio Grande do Sul, and they introduced me to Chimarrão, and they kind of taught me a lot about what to look for when you're choosing a good herb, when you're choosing a good gourd, what kind of straws work well, and that's how I kind of got into it. And they taught me a lot, and then I went on to kind of research it on my own, spent a lot of money trying different brands of herbs, trying different gourds, and I feel pretty confident that I know a little bit about Brazilian Chimarrão.
And what brought you to Brazil in the first place? You said that you were a major. What are you? What is it? A Hispanic language major, or?
Yeah, so I actually majored in Portuguese. That was after I lived in Brazil. I actually lived in Brazil as a missionary.
Okay.
I was down there spreading the word, and got some word spread to me as well.
Nice. And then you ended up just basically, like you said, you tried the mate, you burned yourself, but then you got into it, and you kind of, I'm assuming you started to investigate it on your own. You said you bought a lot of mate. And then what was the point when you realized, wow, this stuff is really powerful. I can see myself drinking it for the rest of my life. Or was that something that just naturally happened and nothing you ever really thought about?
It wasn't something I really thought about probably until I'd been drinking mate for about a year, when I realized, wow, I drink this stuff every day.
Yeah.
And there were days where I would go without it, and it's not like I didn't have an addiction, it's not like I felt bad, I didn't have withdrawals from it, so I was pretty okay with the fact that I was drinking it every day. But I just realized, wow, this is kind of a big part of my life now, and I was drinking, mate on the street, taking my gourd with me. I had a bottle that has the built-in little cup for herb with a little straw you can drink while you're walking. And I just really, really realized I really liked the flavor, which a lot of people still try to tell me that I don't really like the flavor and that I just I'm addicted, so I have to drink it. But I really, really do like the flavor, and I really, really just love the tradition and the cultural aspect of sitting in the circle, talking, sharing stories, laughing, making fun of each other, all around, this funny little gourd. So.
That's right. So then I like how you explain that, because not long after I started drinking mate, when I was living in Buenos Aires, I noticed that it was such a communal drink. People just said, okay, hey, Dave, let's go drink some mates. And we would sit down, and never a word would be spoken about the mate, hardly ever. It would just be second nature. It would just be, sit down, let's talk about whatever's going on in our lives. And I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. Coming from New York, I never saw things like that happening. So it was great to see that mate was really like a social binder.
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny because you mentioned that they don't really talk about it. It's just kind of second nature. I had to almost like grill people for to tell me about it. Like, what is this? Like, what makes it good? What can make it bad? Like, how do you make it? And I had multiple people who were like, I don't know how to make it. I always had friends that knew how to make it, so they would just make it and we drink, and that's how it went. So it was kind of interesting in that way, how it's one of those things where it's so ingrained in their life that they just don't think about it.
Right. And now in southern Brazil, is it similar to how in Uruguay, where you basically, I don't know if you visited Uruguay, but in Uruguay, everybody has a thermos in their hand, a gourd in their hand, a bombilla sticking out of the gourd. Literally everywhere that you go, you see it. I've seen people on motorcycles with one hand just drinking mate. Is southern Brazil sort of like that? You just see people drinking mate all the time?
Yeah, Rio Grande do Sul especially is very much like that. You'll go to the shopping mall and they'll have, the bathroom, the drinking fountain, and a hot water station for you to refill your thermos. So, it's very much like that. You walk down the street, and everyone's drinking it. And you can always, even in parts that aren't super concentrated in mate drinkers, you can always tell where someone who drinks mate lives, because in front of their house there'll be a bunch of dried used herb on the street where they dump out their gourd.
Yeah.
So it's funny because you can always spot them. And yeah, down in Rio Grande do Sul, definitely is a big part of life, and everyone's always drinking in. People taking into the movie theater and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that people have been asking me over the years is what's going on with this whole distinction between Uruguayan mate, that's pretty much all grown in Brazil, in contrast to what I guess you would say the native mate that is specific to Brazilian companies. What's the differences, the distinctions between the two mates?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the first important thing to realize is just because something has a country of origin, that doesn't necessarily mean that it reflects that country's culture or tradition. So like you said, most, if not all, of Uruguay's mate actually does come from Brazil, because Brazil just happens to be the world's largest grower of mate at the moment. It changes between country, but right now, if the numbers I looked at were correct, they're growing the most right now.
Yep.
So Uruguay being a neighbor of Brazil and them not really having the resources to grow their own, Brazil kind of steps in and takes that. But there are a couple of pretty good and pretty actually easy distinctions to kind of identify an Uruguayan herb and a traditional Brazilian chimarrão herb. And I actually have a couple of herbs here on a piece of paper. I'm not sure how well you can see this. Can you see that at all?
Just a little bit. Oh, yeah, right there. I see it perfectly.
Okay.
Nice.
So here, this right here, the really green stuff, that is chimarrão. That's the Chimango brand. This is Canarias. This is Mate Factor Organic Green.
Okay.
And then this is just actually La Rubia, just kind of for some more contrast. And you can, I mean, between these three, it's night and day, really. You can tell this is much greener, this is much finer, much powderier. This, the Canarias, it's pretty brown. The Mate Factor, they advertise it as being green, and it's greener than the most, but when you compare it to the Chimarrão, the Chimango, it instantly looks brown just by how green it really is.
That's intense green. It's like neon, the Chimarrão. Yeah.
And actually, I'll talk about this a little later, but it's kind of hard to get Chimarrão in America, and when you buy it in America, it's usually kind of old. So very fresh Chimarrão herb is actually greener than this. This looks pretty green, but I'm sure you've seen in like your Instagram pictures and stuff. It gets neon green.
So we're talking about literally a couple days after it's picked, it's ready to go, foil vacuum.
Yeah. Within a week of them harvesting it, it's on the truck.
Mm-hmm.
So and I can bring it back up again just to kind of call attention, but once again, you can, I don't know if you can really tell, but this stuff is it's really just powder.
Yeah.
It's powder with a couple
hardly any twigs in there.
Yeah, just little tiny bits of twig, a couple of pieces of leaf here and there, little kind of bigger pieces of leaf. And Canarias really is, it's very small pieces of leaf, but it's pretty obvious that there are, just kind of crushed up leaves opposed to powders. Kind of same with the Mate Factor Green. So that is really the big difference between Chimarrão and Uruguayan mate Uruguayo, is that it's cut much finer. There are kind of the thick cut Chimarrão. That's really kind of more of a special taste brand type. Not a whole lot of people drink it. It's not the traditional Chimarrão.
And would that be closer to, would you say, like a classical Argentine mate? Or no?
No, I would say it's closer to probably Paraguayan.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite as coarse as Argentine.
Right. And what about, I'm sure you get this question, some people, when I first started drinking, Mate Factor, people always tell me you need a certain bombisha, but from my experience, I didn't need a certain bombisha. I figured out how to use any bombisha for it. That's just my experience, but I do find that using a spoon, what I call a spoon bombisha, is usually the best bombisha to use for such mate. What is your experience with that?
I guess I do have a question for you, Dave. Have you ever actually prepared your own chimarrão with like a chimangora madrugada herb?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay. And have you ever tried it with a coil bombisha or a slotted one?
No, I've tried that mate only with the spoon bombisha, admittedly. But I have tried Mate Factor, which is not super powdery as that. Yeah. And then my own stuff, Galaxy, which is a combination of different mates, which is super powdery. And I've been able to use that successfully with any bombisha.
Yeah.
But
Galaxy is closer to more like a Paraguayan cut, correct?
Yeah.
So in my probably now 4 years of drinking mate, I have tried multiple times to use a coiled or a slotted or any other kind of bombisha with chimarrão, and I don't think it works. Just not at all.
Too powdery.
It's just too powdery. It really is just too powdery. You really do need what you call the spoon. In Portuguese, we say bomba. In Spanish, bombilla. And I actually have a couple of examples of straws, of bombas they use in Brazil for chimarrão, and they're all the spoon type.
Right.
All of them.
And they're all pretty long. We're talking like 7-8 inches each of them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because hold on. Here's kind of the.
Nice, man. You got a nice little setup.
Yeah, I probably have 30 straws. These are just kind of the ones that were on top. But I don't know if you saw the size of the gourd. These are typically much larger than the gourd that you're gonna drink. Mate Argentino in. So,
right. You said what? You hold a quarter pound in those?
Yeah, I've actually got anywhere from 100 to 150 grams. There are gourds. I actually have a gourd that I can pull out in a bit. That if you pack it in the traditional way, it'll actually hold 500 grams of herb.
Wow, 500 grams. And do people realistically pack that with a pound of mate and just drink it to themselves?
To themselves, no. They're sharing that with a group of 15.
Right. But typically they're doing a setup like you have right there, that you put about 125 grams or so of mate in it, and you just drink that throughout the day. You do your hemisphere switch, and that's it. You're good for the day.
Yeah, that's pretty typical. The setup that I've got right now, the way I've packed it, I don't know if you can really tell. Try to.
Yeah.
You can't actually do a hemisphere switch because, as you can see, it covers the whole top.
Right.
So this way. You just drink it all day long, and it just eventually will just soak the entire mass of herb. Oh,
so you just put that little hole on the side. It looks like there's a little hole on the side of it. I've seen this before. I've never actually tried it though. It's like a little water hole that's perpendicular to the bombisha, and that's it.
Yep, and that's where you refill the gourd from.
So do you end up flooding the mate at the end to use all the dry herb that stays on top, or no? You just kind of
usually by the end when it's pretty washed out, there's usually probably a half inch maybe or a little less than that of dry herb still there. What I typically do is I kind of shake that off into a napkin, and then I'll throw out the rest of the herb, wash it, dry it, and then I'll pour that herb from the top inside and shake it so it coats the entire inside of the gourd. That's a pretty traditional way of storing your gourds in Brazil, is with a fine layer of herb dust on the inside. So that's what I'll typically use.
Right.
That kind of little last bit that doesn't get quite wet on top.
And how do you? I've seen this in Brazil where people actually have what appears to be like this circular board.
And one of these?
Top it off. Yeah. Can you explain this whole situation?
Yeah. So when you make mate, usually, for example, this is a smaller Brazilian gourd. It's made out of wood, capped in aluminum, and pretty comparable to a gourd that you would drink out of, with like a circle of drink, chalice, something like that. When you're making, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I was just gonna say, is it Palo Santo inside?
No, this is I think this is just like some regular wood. I'm not really sure. This is I do have some Palo Santo gourds. This isn't one of them.
Yeah, the reason I was wondering is I saw one just like that the other day, and I was just wondering that the person who was selling them didn't specify. So
I really don't know what kind of wood it is. It doesn't really smell like Palo Santo.
Yeah, that's the good thing. You can always definitely tell by the smell if it's not.
For sure. But yeah, so basically, this is an extremely small gourd for Brazil, and the traditional kind of way of making chimarrão is you fill. It's very similar to the way you would pack an Argentine gourd. Put in herb up till about 2/3. Put your hand over it and give it a good shake. However, with a gourd, say like this, that holds 500 grams of herb, there's no way your hand will go over that. So what they'll use is one of these. They call them vira-mate or a cebador, and that's actually got that's the emblem of the state of Rio Grande do Sul on it. Mm-hmm. And they'll put it on there, and that's how they'll shake the gourd with this.
Right.
And then
when you bring it back, they do the whole bring back 45 degrees.
Shake it, and then slowly, and then you'll kind of like that, and then you'll have a nice flat surface right there. And they actually sell kind of versions like this, but kind of moon-shaped, so that you can actually leave on there, so that if you're drinking at like the beach or on a motorcycle somewhere windy, the wind won't blow your herb off.
Right.
What's the spelling on that? Is it generally sold by the Argentinian name or the Brazilian name that you first mentioned? I mean, is it a complicated spelling? I'm just wondering how I can look to maybe get one of those, because I was kind of looking for one of those the past few weeks.
For one of these?
Yeah. I was just wondering if there's any online seller that has them.
I have never seen one on a seller that isn't based in Brazil.
Yeah.
I know there's a company called Tereré Shop that they will send to the United States, but I'm sure the postage would be quite high even for something like this.
Right.
So, yeah, it might almost be worth your while just going out and buying yourself a circle of leather and some plastic and just kind of making your own at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stephen, can you talk about the different cuts of chimarrão, the different cuts, like the pura fala and the moita grossa and the traditional cut?
Yeah, for sure.
The terms that you actually have used. I'm just using terms that I've heard from other Brazilians.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are definitely three terms that are, you're going to see on packages. There's the kind of the normal is the tradicional, and that is what I've actually had down here. It's going to be a nice, really powdery, maybe a few larger chunks of leaves, maybe some stick, depending on the brand. The company could be larger sticks, could be smaller sticks, but that's pretty much how it is. The tradicional, a lot of powder and then a little bit of stick. The pura folha will actually be basically just the powder.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a little more bigger chunks of leaves, but it really is basically just a big bag of powder.
Yeah, like what you showed us before, pretty much.
Yeah, and then moída grossa will be the actual size of the cut is closer to a like a yerba paraguaya, like a galaxy or a la rubia or curupi. It's not as coarsely ground as say an Argentine herb, but compared to the way Brazilians drink it, it is moída grossa, which that's all that means. It's ground coarsely. And those will typically have sticks in it as well. So there are those three cuts, and then there are also three government standards that the Brazilian government regulates mate by, and they're PN1, PN2, and PN3. The PN just stands for Padrão Nacional, which means national standard.
Mm-hmm.
PN1 requires that a minimum that the package of herb contains a minimum of 70% leaves. So it can have 80%, it can have 90%, but it has to have at least 70, and then the remainder will be stick. PN2 is 60-40, and PN3 is 50-50. And I personally have never really seen PN3 being sold. I've never had an herb that was PN3 that had so much stick in it that it was actually 50% stick.
Yeah.
That sounds actually kind of awful. But those are the three cuts, and those are the three kind of government standards by which they regulate the cuts of the herb and the quality of the herb.
Mm-hmm. Now in Brazil, like in like in Paraguay, and I know personally from Argentina, there's some people who just have their favorite brand, and that's pretty much all they go to. Is that sort of the same situation in Brazil? People just have the brand that they love, like say for instance Chimarrão, and they just go to get that every time? Or is it more diverse in terms of people like to experiment, like how somebody would enjoy 3 different types of wine, they get a different type? Is it like that, or is it more traditional, like, well, let me just get the mate I love?
I think it's probably a good mix of the two. There are definitely people that are, they like their Chimango or Barão de Cotegipe. Those are kind of the two big brands, or Laranjeiras is another big brand. And people know them, they like them, so they'll go for those. But since drinking Chimarrão, it is a social setting. If someone else comes and prepares their gourd with a different kind of herb, maybe they're like, oh, I like that a lot. I want to go give that a try sometime. So, I think it is a good mix of being loyal to a certain brand, a certain cut, and experimenting with the different, varieties. Because there are hundreds upon hundreds of companies that make Chimarrão in Brazil.
Right. Some that the typical North American would never be exposed to unless they had gone to Brazil to try it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, out of those, hundreds of companies, 99 probably never leave the city where they're produced. Honestly.
Wow, they're that hyper local like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they have no intention to export things like that. It's funny because I found that same situation happening in northern Argentina, where I've contacted a lot of growers who really absolutely had no intention whatsoever, no desire to export their mate. It seemed to be sort of just like a local affair, or maybe they would export it to as far as Buenos Aires, which is about 12 hours away. So it's all these super local grow farms, and it's kind of like a winery somewhere where they're not exporting their mate.
Yeah. They're not in it to become this giant company, and a lot of times they don't want to be. They like to keep it small. They like to keep it simple. They like to be kind of known as the local brand, and a lot of times they have pride in being the local brand, so they don't want to sell to other people, because the people living in that town pride themselves on being able to drink this one brand that no one else can drink, so it's kind of less special if someone else can buy it in another city. Right.
No, that makes sense. And what would you say to people who are just starting to investigate Brazilian yerba mate? Could you give them a rundown on a couple brands, and why you like those brands, and things for them to kind of expect, perhaps?
Yeah. If you are living in North America, in the United States, you really are only going to be encountering 2 brands. You're going to encounter Chimango. Let's get that a little closer. This is the kind of top shelf variety that they have, the Especial Nativo. You're either going to be encountering that or another brand called Madrugada. Chimango is definitely the easier to find, though, if you can find a very well-stocked Latin market or a Brazilian store if you live in certain parts of the country. Those are really the only 2 that I've ever seen in the United States. As far as, let's say, best case scenario, you have found a store that sells these funny little vacuum bricks. my counsel would be check the expiration date. On this, it's printed right here in black stamp. The problem with these, like I said, the problem with these, they do last for 2 years. From the time they make them, these will stay good for 2 years. The problem is, basically what happens is they will sell these in Brazil. Whatever hasn't sold within a year, they export. These are exported, but they're not made for export, so they just kind of, whatever's left, we'll ship those out to the United States. And with that, since these are not made for export, be very careful when you're reading the expiration date. Since these do come from not the United States, the month and the day will be switched. The first number will actually be the day, the second number will be the month, and the third number will be the year. So you might look at it and you might think, oh my goodness, this expired in October, but it actually expires in March of next year because it's 10-3 instead of 3-10.
Right. Yep, that's how they do it over there.
So just be cautious of that. If you find Chimarrão that's not in a vacuum pack, I have seen a couple of stores, for example, in LA, will sell they will be a metal package like this, but they won't be vacuum packed. I would just stay clear of those, honestly, because they are treated the exact same way that these are. Whatever doesn't sell gets shipped out here, and by the time they make it out here, you're going to open it up, and instead of that really fresh green smell, you're just be looking at a bunch of yellow dust. And it's really not good, unfortunately. That's the problem with such a fresh product. Like I said, one day they pick the leaves, the next day they flash dry them, the next day they chop them up, put them in the bag, and they're gone. In the vacuum pack, they will last for about 2 years. Outside of a vacuum pack, they will be good for about 6 months. And it's usually about a year before some herb will actually make it from Brazil to America. So if you buy something that's not vacuum packed, it probably expired half a year ago. Right.
Like I said before, my first experience with any sort of Brazilian mate was Mate Factor. On a trip back from Brazil, from Argentina, I had Mate Factor one day, and I liked it. I had this sort of nutty component, sort of like almost like a chocolate undertone. But after several months of drinking, I noticed that the cycle was really short. That was my main problem I had with that particular Brazilian mate. Do you find that as something that is a detriment to it, or for you maybe the cycle isn't short for certain things, or how would you compare Mate Factor with a Zamango, something like that?
I think Mate Factor, I'm not sure. I mean, I've never been to their processing plant. I'm not sure how they do it, but I have noticed that if you drink Mate Factor, the fresh green, with hot water, that it does tend to wash out really quickly. With traditional Chimarrão, I can easily drink 1.5 liters of water with a single gourd. So, the cycle is, I would say, comparable to any other herb. Yes, the gourds are bigger, so you will technically use a little more herb than you might on a smaller gourd. But even on a gourd like this, I can get 1 liter of drinking out of this, and this only holds. It holds 6 ounces of liquid, but I probably only use maybe 3 spoonfuls of herb to pack this.
Do you use the volume of the larger gourd to get the strength of flavor that you want, or can you get the strength of flavor?
With the large gourd like this?
Wow.
Yeah, do you actually, what I'm saying is, do you need the larger volume of the Chimarrão inside the larger gourd to get the strength of drink you want, or can you get an equally satisfactory Chimarrão in a smaller container?
Yeah, so for example, I've got these two. They're similar sizes of gourds, but this one holds probably 1/4 of the herb that this one holds, just because this one's more hollowed out. They both have, they will both deliver a very satisfactory and a very flavorful and an equally long drinking session. This may be a little longer just because of the absurd amount of herb that it uses. But I was actually talking to Dave about this yesterday. Because there is the traditional way of packing a gourd like this, where you put herb up to here, dip it on its side or upside down, shake it, and then put in the water, put in the straw, and then add the hot water. But there actually is a way that we do it in Brazil as well, where you add the water first, then you pour the herb on very quickly until the top, and then you will use a straw to kind of open up a space You add a little more water to kind of top it off, and then you add the straw. This straw is obviously too short for this gourd, but then you basically, it's ready to go right away. You can do it in about 10 seconds, very quick, and it uses much less herb because you are only theoretically packing this much of the herb, but as the herb, sucks up the water, it'll, kind of build, hard to do this backwards, it'll build, a wall and stay up and flavor this entire gourd without using, 500 grams of herb, which is kind of insane.
I see. That's
so it's a good time saver, it's a good herb saver, and, actually the way you make the kind of more interesting patterns like this, or I actually will make it sometimes because I'm married and sometimes like to be romantic. You can actually put 2 straws in one gourd, so you can drink it like a sundae or like a milkshake on a date, in the 1950s.
Let me ask you this: what's this thing with the whole star anise?
Oh,
I see that all the time on Instagram. People put this one. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the star anise pod, but it's basically like it's a seed that tastes like licorice, and it's in the shape of a star, and it's very nice, actually. I've had a tea out of it before, but I always see people decorating the top of the gourds with that. I don't know if it's just a little gimmick people do for fun. It's just aesthetics, or what?
So in Brazil, something that they like to do a lot is they will actually brew tea in their thermos and drink their chimarrão with tea. That's not the most traditional way to do it, but there are a lot of people that do it. Other people will actually put tea into kind of the hollow part in the water hole of their gourd, and what I suspect those people are doing is they're probably putting the star anise inside their gourd as well, and then they'll just throw one more on top of the herb to just kind of make it pretty. The Brazilians love to make their chimarrão very pretty. I'm sure, Dave, you've seen it.
Oh yeah.
There's 52 different ways to pack a chimarrão gourd. All the different ways. You can have the hole in different places. You can have a horseshoe on top. You can make it like an anthill. You can make it backwards so that you actually are filling it from the other side. And they sell actually little like figurines you can put inside the herb.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Couches and stuff. So they love to just like trick out their chimarrão.
Just out of curiosity, do they use traditional like black tea, or do they go for green tea, or what when they're doing?
They usually don't make it out of tea. They'll usually make like a chamomile, or there's a lot of teas. I don't know what the names are in English. They're herbal teas though. They're not like that kind of. They're not teas. They're herbal teas.
Maybe a rooibos or a honeybush or something.
Yeah, they have an herb that they call cidreira, which is very similar to lemongrass. It's actually what's it called? It's the citronella plant, actually. Yeah, cidreira. They'll make a citronella tea often and drink it with that, because they just kind of like to play around with the different combinations, and that way you can still buy a kilo of normal herb, and you're not committed to that one flavor. But if you make a different tea, you can switch up the actual flavor of the mate every time you drink it without being committed into a whole kilo of of flavor. They actually do sell chimarrão that is mixed with other teas, but if you buy that, then you're committed to 500 grams or a kilo of this one flavor. So that's what they do a lot. They'll brew a tea and then add that instead of hot water.
Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed this distinction. I don't even know if there really is one. One time my brother gave me one of those gourds that you show, one of the large ones, and I noticed that the actual calabash seems to be a whole different species than the calabash gourds that are used from northern Argentina. The ones from Brazil seem to be almost like leathery. They have like a different smell. They're definitely softer, and they seem to not dry as quickly as the calabash gourds from Argentina. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not sure if it's a different species, but I know, with this type of gourd, they make them from the other end, so they actually have to drill out the gourd.
I see.
That way they can actually control the size of the hole, but they actually will put it on a lathe and drill out the middle.
Yes.
So that might be what it is. But I've definitely noticed that as well, that, like, for example, this is a traditional, Uruguayan gourd. It has a very thin wall, and, it's very different than, say, this. I actually wish I could show you. I wish I hadn't made the chimarrão in this one, because this probably has, an inch thick wall on the inside.
Yeah. And does it
yeah,
dry quickly, or no? It takes a little bit longer to dry.
no, you have to be really careful that you pat the inside of it dry, or else it'll never dry.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually what people will do is, they'll kind of just pat them dry as best they can and just leave them out in the sun to let them dry overnight, or not overnight, but, throughout the afternoon. Or, yeah, that's basically, I mean, I've seen people dry them out over the stove. I probably wouldn't recommend that because they'll crack that way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, I always ask everybody that comes on to one of these circles, what is your thoughts on the development of yerba mate in the United States? Do you see it growing? Do you see a future for it? Or do you see just mostly quote-unquote hippie sort of people being attracted towards it? Or could you see it becoming mainstream eventually?
If you talk about drinking mate, just any way, any shape, any form of mate, I think it definitely will catch on a lot more with the health boom and the health craze. I think, companies like Guayaquil or, other brands that are selling, or even, Circle of Drink that's selling the tea bags, or like they will sell the bottled, pre-made. Guayaquil has a lot of success with that. So I think mate will probably end up penetrating the U.S. market through that means. Now, traditional loose leaf in a gourd or the straw, as much as I would love to say that it will catch on, and as much as I love to see all my neighbors, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area right now. If there were a place for it to catch on, it would be right here. I live just 5 minutes south of Berkeley. So, but I really do feel like the gourd is still very much a kind of a niche product.
Right.
I'm all for spreading the gourd love. My wife, she drinks a lot of mate. Well, not a lot of mate actually. I'd love her to see her drinking a lot, but she drinks mate. I got her a gourd and a straw for her birthday, and she'll drink out of that. But she definitely prefers making it in a tea ball. She'll put the tarahui in a tea ball and she'll brew it in her teapot. And I'm not gonna force her to drink it another way.
Yeah.
She drinks it and she likes it, but she just thinks it's a little cumbersome to drink out of the gourd every day. Have to keep refilling and blah blah. So,
no, I think that's a good point, because a lot of people who I've introduced mate to, obviously a lot of them have begun to use the gourd, but I would say at least 2 to 3 times as more people just started drinking it out of, say, the tea bags or loose leaf tea, French press, tea infuser, what have you.
Yeah.
And I had no problem with that, because they were able to really begin to feel the effects of mate, what mate is doing to people, how it's giving them energy. Could you talk a little bit about that? Have you noticed mate to give you any sort of clarity of mind? Does it work for you in a certain way? Do you wake up in the morning, you drink it, and it gets you going? Everybody seems to have a different sort of effect, a relationship with mate. Just want to get your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of at the point where I've been drinking mate so long that, it.
Yeah.
You kind of feel, normal now, almost like you've built up a tolerance. But I definitely can tell that, if like when I was in college and I would study, I would always study with mate, and I'm pretty sure it would help me focus. It helped me focus a lot more than if I just drank like a Red Bull or something.
Yeah.
Terrible for you, a little bit. kind of delicious, but terrible for you. I know when I lived in Brazil, I drank just because it's easier to get ice water. I would drink a lot of tereré, and I definitely could tell that it kept me cool, obviously. And what a lot of the people there and a lot of people from Paraguay say is that like the actual compounds in the herb will actually help you to feel cooler as well. I don't know the science behind that. I'm not even sure. It's probably not even true, because a lot of the stuff that they say is not exactly scientifically.
Protein.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. But I definitely felt that when I would drink tereré in the road, as opposed to just cold water, it definitely seemed to make me feel more refreshed. It could be just the caffeine and the other, the theobromine and all that making me feel more clarity. Therefore, I felt more alert and more, not as sluggish in the heat. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it definitely helped me keep going when it was 100, 115 degrees outside. But
right.
Yeah, definitely, clarity of mind, smooth, calm energy. Never ever felt jitters. The only time I think I felt jitters from drinking mate was I drank the tarahui extra energy.
Yeah, I've tried that before.
And that I felt a little like, but I'm pretty sure they put extra caffeine in that. I'm pretty sure they put something
Yeah, I
else.
think they put a lot of guarana seed in there, a lot of it.
Okay, yeah, that makes more
That one
sense.
approves. They have extra. They call it the extra, the energia.
Yeah.
Definitely potent. And they put another herb in it called I think katuba bark, something like that.
Catuaba?
What is that?
Catuaba?
That might be it. I'm not sure, but it's a bark from the
Yeah,
Amazon rainforest.
catuaba.
I never had it, but supposedly it gives you immense amounts of energy.
Yeah, they actually drink it. The natives drink it as a libido enhancer, actually,
Yeah.
the catuaba or bark. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there are definitely some very extreme kind of energy drink style herbs that are out there. But just from a normal traditional herb, very smooth, very clean, very very bright.
Right. Now, if somebody wants to buy some traditional Brazilian yerba mate, where would you send them to get it? If they live in the States, or if they live in, you could probably only speak for the States, but for people living in the UK too, if you know any websites, I don't know, Amazon.
If they're living in the United States, I would first ask where in the United States, because if they live in LA, if they live in Miami, if they live in Atlanta, if they live in Boston, there are Brazilian markets. And I would say go to the Brazilian market because they're going to have it there. If they don't live in any of those places, I would send them to, honestly, Amazon. It's probably the best place.
That's what I keep on hearing.
Yeah, there are a couple of Brazilian websites. I don't remember the URLs off the top of my head. If you just Google online Brazilian market, you can find them there. I've ordered from them before, and typically the packages are closer to the expiration date than you would be if you order from Amazon, because I'm pretty sure the seller on Amazon actually is Chimarrão. It's like the U.S. division of them, so they're shipping whatever they have in their U.S. warehouse directly out. That way it's better than what you would be getting from a third-party retailer. But if you're in the UK, oh gosh, I can't remember it's like you are shop, like shop, yeah. They stock.
They have Chimarrão,
yeah, they have Barão. They have a couple of brands.
Have you ever had that one, the Barão?
Barão.
Yeah.
When I lived in Brazil, that was my go-to herb.
Speak a little bit about that. How is that herb compared to Chimarrão?
Barão, I feel like it's a little more grassy. It's definitely a lot grassier, a lot floral. Chimarrão's kind of more earthy. In Barão, it has a little bit more dust. If you buy the cheaper, they have kind of 3 tiers. If you buy the cheaper, it's a little too dusty for my taste, but I would buy the premium one. And it had the perfect amount of dust, perfect amount of leaf. The sticks, they weren't as chopped up as finely in Chimarrão. They weren't like metamate enormous, but they were probably about there. Yeah. And I didn't mind that at all. I actually liked it because it did make it easier to pick them out if I wanted to make the top pretty. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is that it's a lot more floral and a lot more grassy than Chimarrão is, which is definitely more earthy.
Right.
I miss Barão. I miss it a lot.
I've seen it all over the place, like people on Instagram, but I've never seen it once in any stores. Even when I was in Uruguay or in Argentina, I've never seen it once.
Yeah. I'm almost guaranteed they probably don't sell it there. But in Brazil, even if you don't live in the South, if you go into a large chain supermarket, you'll find Barão. That's kind of the brand that's everywhere in Brazil. And it's not the best, but it's the most reliable and the easiest to find. So for me, it was my go-to herb because I knew no matter where I was in Brazil, I could find it.
You could find it. It was the go-to.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of viewers. We have Mark and Jesse. If you guys want to ask any questions, definitely feel free to ask Stephen a question while you have him here. And we got some other people who aren't on video but are just watching as well. So if you guys have any questions, this is your time. Just kind of open this up to just an open discussion right now. We may stop broadcasting soon, so if you guys are watching this live, you may not see the broadcast anymore. But this video will be posted on the Circle of Drink YouTube page, so you can come back and watch it forever and ever and learn about Chimarrão Brazilian yerba mate.
Yeah. Any questions? If not, I can talk a little bit more just about certain stuff. But if you guys have questions, I'm all ears.
One of the things that I was wondering, I missed the first, I guess, couple minutes or so when I got we were talking about how basically, this is my paraphrasing, that Chimarrão is in essence like the matcha of the mate world. You know, if you compare it to Japanese tea, it's like more of a powdery thing, sort of like matcha is in the tea world. Well, Are you ingesting much of that powder when you drink your chimarrão?
No. I mean, there's going to be some dust in the herb, and you'll ingest the dust just like you will with any other, any other cut of herb. But the actual powder itself, that does take the place of the leaves. So as long as you're packing it right, you shouldn't be ingesting. Because if you do, it's going to be extremely gritty, and you might gag because it's pretty actually nasty if you accidentally drink some of the powder.
And also, when you first did your pack, it was just before I tuned in. Also, did you use the one that you use in the demonstration video on YouTube, where you make your opening after you do
Good. How are you?
powder, and then you make your opening with the spoon, and then you pour it out?
This actually, I didn't actually pack this gourd on the video. That's something I could do. I could run and go grab more herb and maybe pack this one if you guys want to see it. But it's very similar to that demonstration video. But instead of, the only difference is you actually start with the straw in the gourd when you pour the water, and you start with the gourd in the water, let me start again. Straw in the gourd, pour the water, dump the herb on top, and then you flatten it out, and then you drop water onto this part, and then you kind of slowly open up a hole. Let me get that right here better so you can see. And then that's actually where you fill the gourd from, but the basic construction is very similar to that video, yeah.
And when you have your gourd properly made with the chimarrão, is your filter end of the bombilla, is it anchored inside the thickest part of the herb itself, or is it over in the whole area, the vacant area, basically?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, sucking mainly water, or do you have it embedded in herb where you're filtering through the powdered herb?
Ideally, it's going to be kind of a mix, depending on what style of gourd you pack. It can kind of vary. There are ways to pack the gourd where the filter end really is just kind of sitting in the water, but ideally you'll want, this is kind of the edge of the wall, you'll want the filter end kind of smack up against it to form a nice suction, and that's kind of how you prevent it from really clogging up, because if it's sitting too loose in the water, then it has a tend to clog up pretty badly.
So it may not be totally embedded in the clump of herb, but it's like pressed against it with the other side of the water mainly.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just wondering, in your ideal configuration, how that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's not, one specific way. You can get it to work pretty much any way you want. If you embed it, there are ways where you put in the straw and then you twist it, but depending on how you pack the herb and how far you twist it, you can actually get it completely lodged inside there, and then, you've essentially stopped it up completely because you've built a concrete wall around it. And that's not good either. So it really is hard to explain. It's one of those things that you just kind of have to learn by doing, because you can just feel when it's right.
What about the little filter that I've seen people put on, the little cheesecloth filter? I've seen some people put on the end of the filter of their bombilla.
So, funny thing about that, in southern Brazil, they call that a camisinha, which is actually the same word they use for condom.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those definitely work. They will keep out, they will prevent your straw from clogging. The thing about chimarrão in the south of Brazil, southern Brazil has that cowboy culture that they love being like very macho. They'll make jokes about like how macho they are when they really aren't. Like, it's kind of just a joking thing, but it really is based in tradition. And they have a saying that basically says that someone who's really macho won't use one of those filters because if they know how to pack it well, they don't need it. I tend to agree. I used them when I first started drinking chimarrão because I would waste a lot of herb because I would pack it wrong and then it would get all wet and there was no way to save it, so I'd have to throw it out. So when I was first learning, I used those for quite a bit. They're extremely cheap. They last for 6 months. You just kind of take them off, wash them out, put them in boiling water if you want to sterilize it. But now I don't use them at all.
Mm-hmm.
But so just something to interest, since we were talking about tradition, I kind of showed some of my chimarrão straws, my bombas, and you will notice that all of them have the round end. In Brazil, you can buy the traditional, more spoon shape. I actually have, this is a children's one. From a pure tradition standpoint, This is for tereré, and this is for chimarrão. The reason being is that this will fit easier into a guampa, which is the cow horn.
Mm-hmm.
Since those are thinner, this will fit easier, and then this will fit easier into the gourd, since this is about the size that you want inside the gourd to kind of have the best spacing and the best packing with the herb. That being said, there are plenty of people that drink chimarrão with one of these, and plenty of people that drink tereré with one of these. Right. But from a purely tradition, old grandpa gaucho sitting on his farm with his hat and his horse, you would never mix these two. But it's just one of those things.
And I'm guessing the what I call the double action bombicha, the coil spring bombicha, is that unheard of in Brazil, or? They
have them. They use them for tereré, and that's about it.
That's about it. But you would never see somebody using one of those in a traditional a Brazilian gourd like the ones you have.
Yeah, I mean, I have seen online vendors advertising them for chimarrão. I have never met anyone who used one for chimarrão.
Mm-hmm. I was just wondering what kind of, if you were around the old timers much, what kind of music do they listen to in Brazil? Do they listen to like classical guitar, or do they listen to some of the Argentine music, or what?
Yeah, the kind of old classical folk music in Brazil would sound almost like a very smooth, not very twangy, almost like a bluegrass folk. But they also listen to a lot of music that if you didn't know, like tiny Mexican music has very similar sound, like with very similar rhythm, and like guitar strumming patterns. Kind of like that music, but they do down south. They very much have their traditional música gaúcha, which uses a lot of accordion, a lot of very specific drumming and stuff like that.
All right, so what I'm going to ask you, Stephen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this broadcast soon, and then we're going to just open this up for whatever anybody wants to talk about. So what is your sort of final parting words on Brazilian yerba mate, chimarrão, for people who are interested in it? What is your final parting message to them?
Okay. If you are kind of getting stuck in a rut in the mate world with the brands that you've tried, or you want to try something new, and you have the resources available to you, definitely try chimarrão. I have one of the only English language YouTube videos that actually explains how to make chimarrão in the easiest way. So if you just Google how to make chimarrão on YouTube, you can find that and you can learn. It's really not as hard as some people might make it out to be. There is a little bit of technique, but it's really not hard. The flavor is completely different, unlike anything you've ever drank. I would say if you know someone that doesn't like very bitter mate, which a lot of people find mate very bitter, have them try chimarrão. I think it's a lot less bitter, a lot more floral, a lot more grassy. And, it's, at the risk of offending people, I feel like it's a little more pure because it is, direct from the tree. It's not aged. It's, just the pure green herb flavor. And that's why 9 times out of 10, I will reach for this over another brand of mate. I do drink others. Obviously I have these in the house, these other brands, so I obviously drink them as well. But, this is my go-to hot mate with a little bit of technique, with a little bit of, a little tradition, a little know-how, choosing the right gourd, the right herb. Chimarrão can be a delicious, energizing part of your day.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing. So maybe I'll put you on the spot. How about you come back on next week and you give us a presentation step-by-step on how to actually make the chimarrão?
I would love it. Love to do it.
Perfect. Perfect. I got you locked in there.
I can do it in my glass one so you can see the inside.
Yes, that'll be great. That'll be great. So I'm going to end this broadcast, and then we're going to stay on for a little bit more for just to have an open discussion. And whoever's watching this, thank you very much for coming on and listening to Stephen. Appreciate it. Salud. Drink your mate. Keep on coming back, and we're going to have a lot more information on chimarrão. This is just the beginning. We're just breaking the ice, and it's an honor to have Stephen Bentley with us discussing and educating us on Brazilian mate.
Honor to be here.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.